Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the University of Manchester Middle East Centre's online webinar on speculating about the implications of COVID-19 for international business strategy by Professor Dr. Stefan Zagelmeyer. A bit more about our speaker today. Professor Stefan is reading Comparative and International Business at Alliance Manchester Business School, part of the University of Manchester. Stefan has spent more than half of his life in higher education and research in more than 10 countries and on 5 continents. He has held appointments at Manchester School of Management, Université Paris II Panthéon-Assas in France, Turku School of Economics in Finland, University of Twente in the Netherlands, and the University of Stellenbosch in South Africa. He is the author of numerous publications in academic and practitioner-oriented journals. His research contributions fall into the 4 areas of international business strategy, comparative business and management, international human resource management, and business and human rights. Dr. Zagelmeyer has worked as a researcher at the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Societies and at the German Economic Institute. He has also worked as an external consultant for the European Foundation for the Improvement of Living and Working Conditions, the European Commission, and the International Labour Organization. So thank you very much, Professor Stefan, for being with us this afternoon. And I'd just like to let you know that please do feel free to ask questions during the session and we will address those in due course. So thank you very much for attending the session, and over to you, Professor Stefan.
Thank you very much, William. First of all, a warm welcome to everybody attending this webinar. At the moment, it's about 50 people attending, which is pretty impressive. Before I start with kind of my talk, I would like to thank the colleagues, including William especially, for organizing this webinar and for allowing me to kind of present some ideas and talk on a topic which I think everyone is at the moment thinking about literally every day in different capacities, in different formats and different roles, be they private, be they a kind of business related. When I was approached a couple of weeks ago by colleagues from the Middle East Center, they were asking me to think about a topical theme related to the current COVID-19 crisis. I chose at a certain stage a rather long title for the presentation, which is From Lockdown to Reset to the Next Great Transformation, speculating about the implications of COVID-19 for international business strategy. And this is what I would like to do now during the next, let's say, 25 to 30 minutes. The webinar, the format of the webinar is as follows. I will be giving or sharing my thoughts, ideas, and ways of speculating about the topical theme. If you have questions, please feel free to use the chat box to ask them. Since we have quite a few participants, William will help me kind of in filtering and in organizing, and we will get back to those kind of questions. I'm looking forward to an interesting, especially to the discussion part after my presentation. So let's have a look at what the presentation will look like. So I've divided my talk into literally 5 pieces. First of all, our 5 parts. First of all, I would like to briefly get everybody in the frame of thinking about COVID-19 and provide a very brief overview of the COVID-19 crisis unfolding by introducing you to current data and current figures and interpreting or speculating about different aspects of the data. I will then go on discuss a bit the impact and the interpretation, the public discourse that is out there concerning COVID-19, especially as far as the relevance for, and that's bullet point number 3, for the relevance for international business and international business strategy is concerned. The main part, and I think that's kind of maybe the most controversial, maybe the most interesting, you decide in the end, is part 4, From Lockdown to Liberation. So I would like to speculate about literally different scenarios as they can emerge or evolve over well, short, medium and long term, in terms of approaching and ending the crisis, or coming out of the crisis, because this is actually the context in which international business will then have to operate, and this is where then the risk and the opportunities are, which is basically the background to my speculations and to my analysis. And last but not least, I will very briefly sum up the presentation and outline a few topics for future research, public policy, international business strategy implications. I need to mention a disclaimer at the very beginning. When starting to prepare for the presentation, I had all sorts of grand ideas about providing overviews of what international institutions, research is telling about the COVID-19 crisis. I actually moved away from that because still there is too much unknown, too many unknowns in the equation. So that what I'm going to do is something like informed speculation. So this is the statements that I'm presenting and the ideas I'm presenting are based not on solid and sound empirical research. I'm usually a quantitative empirical researcher, but on informed speculation. So that's the first kind of point I need to make. Second, and that relates to the approach I've taken, the intention of the webinar is, instead of providing answers that everyone in this kind of chat room, in this webinar is looking for and has been longing for quite a while now. Instead of providing answers, which I think nobody has at the moment, I would like to present and provide some food for thought and to inspire further discussion and empirical analysis. Let's have a look at the scene at COVID-19 crisis as it has been unfolding. And what I downloaded actually today, so it's literally hot from the internet, from the WHO, the World Health Organization. I downloaded the daily report, or I kind of put in the slideshow one of the figures of the WHO daily updates on the COVID-19 crisis, showing the development of new COVID-19 cases since during the period from 30th December 2019, literally to yesterday. I think the cutoff day yesterday was the 23rd of June, and there's a few interesting things to notice in here. So I think all that are present now in the webinar will remember specific dates during which they were kind of literally noticing changes, some of which minor, some of which gradual, some of which fundamental, as a consequence of the COVID-19 crisis. And I would like to alert you to kind of, 2 points in time, which from my personal perspective, because we need to distinguish literally personal experiences, personal reflection, and personal implications from the grander the scheme of things. For me personally, what was kind of an outstanding kind of period of time was a period starting after Carnival, 25th, 26th kind of February, till the middle of March. That was a time, because I'm literally based with my family in Germany, but I'm working in Manchester in the UK. I'm commuting literally on a weekly basis. This was the period of time during which I was still commuting between Manchester and Cologne. And already then I could notice the stark and significant differences in terms of approaches and dealing with the COVID-19 crisis in the UK and in Germany. While in Germany, the COVID-19 crisis started a couple of days, or some people say a week or 10 days earlier, as compared to the UK. Germany was relatively quick with trying to pursue a kind of a track and trace policy, whereas in the UK there were still discussions about herd immunity, explicit or implicit, and where life was still continuing almost as normal. And I could see that quite significantly when actually commuting back and forth between Cologne and Manchester. Obviously, until the middle of March, the situation has kind of become more serious in the European continent. And here you see the different color shaded areas, literally the WHO regions as they were affected over the past 4 months by new COVID-19 cases. And when we move today, we kind of get the impression that, well, the new cases have been halved over the past kind of 2 to 3 months, and so that the situation is already improving. So if you follow the public discourse on the European continent in particular, it's mostly focusing on relaxation, on kind of easing of the restrictions. However, when you and it would be interesting to see where you in the audience are currently located. If you look at other parts of the world, at the big picture, we're in by no means out of the trouble here. So if you look at the recent couple of days and the new COVID-19 cases, they are massive, especially still in the Americas, in Southeast Asia, and also in the Eastern Mediterranean, which also covers the Arab Peninsula. Another way of thinking about COVID-19 is to look at different indicators. And I brought you here a kind of a screenshot of a daily newspaper, the Süddeutsche Zeitung, a German newspaper. Apologies, I didn't have the time to change the country names, but you see the flags, and most of you will be familiar with the flags of Brazil, the United States, India, the Russian Federation, UK, Sweden, Germany, and Italy. And here you see another way of thinking about COVID-19. The second column here, after the country column, shows you the new cases, and here we have a whopping 30,000 plus cases, new cases yesterday in Brazil. The United States still at a very high level with almost 30,000 per day, going down to Italy, which was the focus of the crisis in February and early March, 190. So the situation is quite different in different parts of the world, in different countries. And then there's other indicators which are quite intriguing. Apart from the total number of cases in column 4 here, the number of death casualties due to COVID-19, and what is even from a public policy perspective more interesting and relevant is actually a kind of the indicator of the number of casualties per 100,000 population in a particular country. And there, surprisingly, the United Kingdom is actually heading the league table infamously. What are now issues with describing the development of the COVID-19 crisis? Obviously, many of us rely on data which is publicly available, which has been compiled by the WHO, the World Health Organization. But there are a number of issues in the background which relate in particular to the validity of the information, the comparability of the information, and reliability. Validity in terms of different interests and motivations in the background, and also differences in ability and capacity to test in different countries. So if you think about it, if you followed the discussions in the United States and in the UK, there was for a long period of time really serious difficulties of actually testing capacity, and we're talking about now some of the leading Western countries, which we would expect to have the capacity to test, and especially if we turn to countries in kind of lesser developed parts of the world or lesser developed regions of the world, testing capacity is a serious issue. So Brazil, for example, we're expecting that actually the number of new cases is significantly higher than the 30,000 here that are listed because of lack of capacity. And the same may apply to Africa, the same may apply to some Southeast Asian countries. Comparability of information. Different countries count differently. For a long period of time, the UK has only published information on people that were tested positive in terms of the death numbers, people that were, well, dying in hospitals and tested positive. Later on, it was figured out that elderly care homes are a serious kind of concern and issue, and the indicators were adjusted. And so there's variation across countries. And last but not least, there's kind of variation in the reliability of interpretation. Different people with different interests, different institutions see different things in the figures. Coming back to a kind of our individual view, most of us, and this is why I showed you the previous slide with the European development and the overall development, most of us usually focus and pay attention to the situation in their immediate area or zone of relevance. So individual perception is influenced by literally their own personal experiences. And this is then leading for international business strategy. So the situation that if, for example, I talk about international business strategy implications, first and foremost, what I have in mind is actually the situation as I experience it currently in the location where I am in Germany. But obviously, if you think about Brazil, if you think about India, if you think about Indonesia, if you think about South Africa, well, I've had I was fortunate to have the opportunity to work in some of those countries. If you think about life there, if you put yourself in the position, the situation is usually much more difficult and dangerous and risky in those countries. So last but not least, before I actually move on to the next part of the presentation, to sum briefly up, I personally was involved in my research a lot in analysis of the impact of the global financial crisis, 2008, 2009, 2010. That was quite problematic because we were kind of facing a situation there which was unfolding quickly and had unprecedented ramifications, but mostly with impact on some sectors and in particular the financial sector. What we now have is actually an unprecedented situation where we face a situation where we are not sure about the root causes, where we don't understand the consequences, the mechanisms of the situation, and where there is no remedy, which makes the situation much more difficult and complex. Let's have a look next at interpretation, impact, and the international business implications of the COVID-19 crisis. Obviously, all of us present in this webinar have to some extent been affected by what some people call the Great Lockdown. So many countries of the world at some stages during the past 3 months, there have been more severe, less severe lockdowns of public and business life. There have been closures of businesses. There have been travel restrictions, closures of borders. There have been in some parts and some cities curfews. And the latest discussions, especially among the international business community, have focused very much on quarantine rules and the opportunity to engage in travel activities again. So that's kind of the great lockdown situation as it has been evolving. This all had impact on our everyday lives. And if I just take a few illustrations, and I'm moving a bit now into anecdotes, but I'm pretty sure that apart from a few of you who may have experienced the SARS crisis, and I was also traveling a lot during that period, I would never have thought that I had to deal with the kind of issue of wearing masks, face masks, and of shortages in the markets for face masks, social distancing. Those are kind of implications which people have seriously not really thought about for a long period of time. I was speaking to my in-laws who are in their early 90s, who have experienced actually social distancing rules in another pandemic of the 1960s, but that was more than 50, or that has been more than 50 years ago in Germany. Home office, homeschooling. I'm kind of now communicating from literally my home office, and the children are at home and also kind of learning for school because they still can't go to school. And last but not least, business-wise, everyday life has been really affected by shortages of essentials, empty shelves, something that, especially in Germany and the UK, has been unheard of for decades, that you couldn't buy pasta, that you couldn't buy coffee, toilet paper, those kind of issues. And I'm pretty sure that those experiences are shared all over the globe in different ways, in different forms. So everyday lives have been very much impacted. The public debate and public opinion also kind of have been focusing very much, as has been public policy. Public policy very much kind of seeking to maintain a functioning economy, stimulating demand, keeping literally the labor markets going, keeping the supply chains going, ensuring that the supply of necessary and essential kind of goods and services are still functioning. So the impact has been, in contrast to the global financial crisis, significantly more severe at all levels. There has been in the public debate a lot of controversial discussion, and when preparing this presentation, I was initially thinking also about kind of going a bit more into detail there. But what I found was that when you analyze the public discourse on the global financial, on the COVID-19 crisis, there's a lot of past dependencies. So different discourse bubbles, as I've called them, explain, interpret, and discuss the COVID-19 crisis in established pathways. So the Marxists kind of blame the capitalist system and are calling for kind of changing the political economic system. We have the nationalists and the populists, which are blaming each other just in terms of the causes and the consequences of COVID-19. Just think about the dispute between China and the United States, in the kind of the blame game that at a certain stage erupted about the origin of the crisis, as if it would literally matter in that kind of situation. We have authoritarian rulers who are reinterpreting the financial crisis in order to legitimize kind of crackdowns or implementing actions which they otherwise would not have done. Then we have a strong fraction of which I put in the category of conspiracy theorists and nihilists, which in every larger crisis situation where a lot of people are affected are kind of mushrooming. And last but not least, we have the pragmatists. So in essence, what's the COVID-19 crisis about? It's about disruption of private lives. It is associated with massive ongoing human suffering. Economically, business-wise, we have a situation where we have simultaneous demand and supply shocks. This is also something which, to me, as a trained quantitative economist, is something not very easy to digest, because usually we either have a demand shock or a supply shock, and they're usually limited to sectors or a couple of sectors or industries. But here we have them at a large scale, and which is actually connected to the root cause of the problem. We have the ongoing crisis until literally treatment and vaccinations are available, which together produce an extremely high level of uncertainty at the individual level, at the economic, societal, and political levels. While we've experienced that kind of degree of uncertainty individually, I think all of us have in some way. And also economically, I think we can think about ways in which, not least in terms of empty shelves, we have been affected. But the societal and the political implications are not yet clear and have not yet kicked in, and we can expect some changes there. So how is international business affected by the COVID-19 crisis? Again, running the risk of oversimplification, international business operations has literally been affected in almost all areas. When you think about international markets, international trade, and in the region, I would expect that most of the participants in the audience are currently located in Arab countries or in kind of Northern Africa, Eastern Africa, or kind of Asia Minor. If you think about the oil markets in particular, unheard of challenges there, which then have also repercussions on public policy and the budgets of the respective governments. Trade connections being interrupted, global value chains. This is what has been the focus of a lot of discussion, not least because you could in Western countries which have not been used to empty shelves, you have that in the public debate, where to source toilet paper from. where to source hand sanitizers from if global value chains are interrupted, where to get kind of face masks because whatever 90+% of the world production are being produced in China if China is in lockdown. Global value chains being interrupted. Multinational corporations, foreign direct investment. There's a report by a consulting company which is monitoring FDI projects that FDI involvement has been kind of almost at a standstill. Or is currently almost at a standstill. Mergers and acquisitions. We have then implications there also in the kind of the business context that similar to the global financial crisis, some countries have undervalued companies which are attractive to kind of strategic investors with geopolitical interests from other countries, and governments are responding to that. And last but not least, a point which I personally feel as somebody who has traveled a lot, who enjoys traveling, and who likes working in different places of the world and doing teaching and research, but also kind of others are affected by that. Restrictions on the mobility of goods and people. Think about working migrants, especially in Arab countries. It would be interesting to see the implications of COVID-19 on those migrant streams. Remittance issues, people not being able to work outside the country, where literally the families are dependent on remittance payments from kind of work abroad, from migrant workers. Huge implications. Likewise, regulatory environment, I mentioned already. Two more aspects which I would like to briefly highlight before moving on to the discussion and the speculation about what will happen in the near future or medium term. For about 30 years, we've been, at least in Western countries and also at business schools, we've been advocating the advantages of kind of market-based private ownership solutions to a lot of kind of previously political problems previously dealt with by public sector companies. So literally in the crisis now, what has changed in many countries is that large multinational corporations which were at risk of going bust, going insolvent and bankrupt, were actually bailed out by the public sector, by governments. So we actually have a significant shift away from private to the public sector. And last but not least, the asymmetric developments that I mentioned, the crisis affecting different parts of the world, different industries, different companies differently. This is also, I now have to literally also be a bit careful, because I don't want to paint too bleak a picture. There is risks and opportunities, and not all businesses are affected in the same way. There are industries and sectors which are doing relatively well, and I can kind of use the crisis as opportunities, and others which are severely affected. Where do we go? What are the next future developments? And I brought three illustrative views from which I've kind of read in the literature. The first one, the Great Reset, which I think is a kind of the idea of continuing business as usual. You just have to sit out the crisis, keep calm and carry on. A kind of a traditionally pragmatic, apologies to the UK people in the audience, a rather what I, from a German perspective, would consider a British approach. So business as usual, try to make the best out of it, try to see to get out of the situation with minimum impact. There's others who are kind of already kind of referring to the end of capitalism as we know it, from the left, but also from the right. The question is, well, what comes instead in the end? What is it replaced by? Definitely not kind of Soviet style kind of communism. Is it totalitarian regimes which will kind of flourish in the post COVID-19 kind of world? And one other view is actually, and this is what I used for the title of the presentation, that we may see another great transformation. This refers to the ideas of Karl Polanyi, an economic sociologist who in 1944 published a very, very influential book, The Great Transformation, who was, as a kind of taking a historian's perspective, a kind of a long-term history-related perspective on the development of capitalism, who is kind of who has been arguing that a great transformation occurred with industrialization on economic, political, and social life, and that we may be seeing something like that again in the not so distant future. Let me now move on speculating, and this is kind of the section which I kind of call from lockdown to liberation. So I was thinking, what's actually the opposite? I mean, everybody got used to lockdown, to shut down now. So what's actually the opposite of is it unlocking? And I think a much more positive concept is actually liberation. So I called the section from lockdown to liberation. What I did in this section is, and I would like to provide a brief overview of that only, that actually needs to be explored and elaborated on in much greater detail. And when I put together the presentation, I was thinking, well, that actually deserves some more thought and development. So I'm presenting some sort of rudimentary first ideas here, starting from different scenarios of getting out of the crisis. And I call that part modes and pathways. And based on the kind of the discussions that I've seen in the newspapers, but also in the academic arena, I would like to distinguish in total 4 different modes of getting away or out of the lockdown to kind of opening up to a liberated kind of world post COVID-19. And there's different approaches out there, which first of all, I would like to describe, but then I would also like to share with you a few thoughts about what are the mediating, moderating variables, what are the drivers that we kind of move towards one or another solution of liberation. The first mode, I added actually this morning because UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson yesterday dropped that kind of concept, hibernation, end hibernation. To get out of hibernation. When you think about hibernation in biology, animals kind of wintering and then kind of getting out of hibernation. The idea behind that is that leaving the crisis is somehow associated with a positive turn, a sudden awakening to a bright future where everyone can live happily ever after. When I heard that kind of concept, hibernation, I was thinking that through. I was thinking that's a bit like in the world of fairy tales. I mean, there have been things in my life like Brexit, for example, but also now the crisis where I wake up in the morning and I hope, well, hopefully all those things have gone away, just gone away, so that we can actually continue with our kind of usual life, with our businesses not being affected by issues like Brexit or COVID-19. Unfortunately, I think this is a fairly unrealistic scenario, and I think it's kind of maybe taken metaphorically from the world of fairy tales, like the Sleeping Beauty, waiting for the kiss of the prince, and then everything is good and okay and sunny and happy again. So end of hibernation. I think rather it will be a kind of a mode which, and that was my initial idea, resembles kind of what's happening when we, or what resembles ideas which are taken from the computer world, from IT, literally, when you think about it. And I think I would like to actually label the different options in line with what most of us are familiar with: rebooting systems, resetting systems, or a system transformation. System reboot. When you reboot a computer, you usually have 2 choices. You have a soft reboot or a cold reboot. So when do you do a reboot of your computer? You do that when the computer is slowing down, when you have too many windows open, when you have too many programs kind of working in parallel, kind of interacting with each other and kind of leading to complications and to problems. And I think getting out of the lockdown could happen as a kind of a soft reboot, and this is what some people think, by just kind of literally shutting down and then restarting. the economy. The system continues to operate as before, but in a more focused, efficient and smooth way. I think that would be actually a quite positivist scenario, which wouldn't require literally a lot of changes in terms of resource allocation, in terms of changing values, in terms of changing property rights, adapting institutions and so on. So everybody after COVID-19 would be a bit more careful about a few issues. Second option of the system reboot is that sometimes you're trying to restart, but the computer is not kind of stopping, is not shutting down. And what you then have to do is you have to use a cold reboot or a hard reboot, which is literally switching off power and hoping that the computer is restarting again. Concerning the COVID-19 crisis, I could see that as an option where we have a cooling off period. That means the current situation in many countries where we're under lockdown or shutdown, and people are reflecting on the system as such, and are then kind of starting afresh with the existing systems, but a bit more mindful about the disadvantages of the system. At this stage, I can remind you of the other crisis that we're actually facing, and that's a climate crisis. Some commentators actually argue that this is what we're currently experiencing is just a small preview of what's going to happen when the climate crisis really kicks in. And so the cold or hard reboot may be an opportunity to literally take a cooling off period of reflection and think about how to improve the system altogether. If that's not working, a more harsher way of starting again would be a factory reset. Those of you that have ever done a factory reset, I've done that twice in, how long have I been working with computers? 40 years. Last time, just before Christmas, a week before Christmas, it took me 4 days to get the computer running, up and running again. There's different options of system resets, factory resets. That's literally when you use a reset to remove the computer or to move the computer into a state where it operates with kind of the operating system where you have the software installed, but you remove literally all kind of user traces of users' activity. So you put the kind of the computer and the software in a kind of an innocent state, and then kind of continue working with that system. In case of the economy, political and social system, I would like to argue that this would require factory reset would be associated with using an existing property rights configuration and the existing institutions to breathe new life into the system, as compared to a hard reset where you just kind of literally move back to the operating system and you have to reinstall the software again. In our case here, it would be rebuilding institutions, rebuilding trust, rebuilding kind of linkages, new institutions and new behavior. That's kind of the system reset option. The systems transformation, that's kind of number 4. That is what many pro-business commentators at the moment are not really considering, that we may actually see system transformation in the economic, in the social, in the political system. That means we may see a fundamental change of the entire system in which we're living. If at the moment, from the German perspective, if I just look at Germany, everything seems to be still stable. But if I think about other countries which don't have kind of the public finances in the background as Germany has, which do not have a health system as Germany has, I can see really significant and severe changes in the social structure, in the political system, and the economic system, which would mean that literally at the value level, at the property rights level, you would have changes. You would have then subsequently changes in the institutions and also in human behavior. How is that kind of now happening? So I've tried to outline literally different scenarios now, some of which I consider pretty unrealistic and some others which I consider relatively more realistic, but which have different configurations of life after COVID-19. What now decides where we're moving? And where we are moving will depend very much on where we are located. It will differ between countries. It will differ between different regions of the world. And what are now those drivers that drive a particular country, a particular economy into either a system reset, into a system transformation, or just a system reboot? It is, I think, two sets of factors. The first one being COVID-19 treatment vaccination. It will depend very much on the time horizon. I mean, one of the few things which I find kind of stable is actually the comments by people saying that, well, the crisis will not be over until we have an effective treatment or an effective vaccination, or a combination of both. So the time it will take to literally develop and implement treatment and vaccination will determine to a large extent about how economies, societies, political systems, and so the international business environment will fare. And second, those elements that I will introduce, which relate to economic systems, social systems, and political systems, are interdependent, with trade-offs and social and ethical dilemmas. And this is what we see at the moment in many countries. Even if politicians, even if the population wants to maintain the lockdown, especially the business and the economic lockdown, obviously poverty drives people into, or lack of resources drives people into working irrespective of the COVID-19 situation, making potentially the situation worse. So we have interaction effects. When we look at the economic systems, which usually deal with the allocation and distribution of scarce resources and has as outcome variables wealth, equality, economic stability, there's different choice options that countries have. We have variation already, but also post-COVID-19, we may see a lot of variation in terms of what economic institutions are out there. Some countries may move towards planned economies, others may move towards more kind of market-based solutions, with all sorts of political knock-on effects. Social systems. This is also something in international business strategy which we often ignore. How do social systems, which usually coordinate the activities of all of the population in countries, how are they responding to the COVID-19 crisis in terms of providing life chances, human capability, social stabilities? There are different actors and institutions out there regulating coordination in social systems. And last but not least, the political systems, which are about problem solving, interest mediation, conflict resolution, and governance. Political stability, voice and legitimacy of decision making as outcome variables. We have different political systems. So literally COVID-19, the crisis, the implications of the crisis are mediated and moderated by economic systems, social systems, and political systems. And the interaction can be quite severe. So, for example, if problems in the economic system, a demand shock, say, leads to unemployment, large-scale unemployment. You may have heard of the numbers in the United States of people being made redundant or laid off, 40 million plus since the start of the crisis. That may have repercussions in the social system, people being driven into poverty, people driven in the hands of kind of extremist kind of politicians or political actors, which then can destabilize political systems, which will then have kind of repercussions in the economic system. So there's a lot of complexity out there, which is even more complicated by two other developments that we're currently facing, the global leadership challenge. So at the moment, there's a contest going on about moral and ideational leadership. We're moving towards a multipolar world. And this goes very much hand in hand with a global governance challenge about the structures of international governance. And there we have literally a conflict between those more on the side of nationalist populist approaches, taking back control, national control, versus multilateral solutions at the international level. So those are all kind of aspects which will then kind of mediate and moderate how the COVID-19 crisis unfolds and how it will be resolved. Let me now wrap up towards the end some international business strategy implications. A brief summary. COVID-19 has significant impact on the business context and represents a fundamental challenge to international business strategy. I tried to highlight literally the implications that are happening in the international business strategy context, not so much for the operational aspects or the kind of the business or strategy, corporate strategy aspects. When we think about the pathway to and the mode of post-COVID-19 liberation, at the national and international level, they will be influenced, the options will be influenced by complex interaction in political, economic, and social systems, and by the time factor which it takes until therapies, treatments, and vaccinations are available. What are now the strategy implications? At all levels, we're facing unprecedented degrees of uncertainty, which, to be honest, and this is a positive note, provides on the one hand risks, but also opportunities for business activities. So quite a few businesses are doing well and are identifying some opportunities in that complexity that is currently kind of going on. Last but not least, and this is some food for thought, which goes a bit beyond COVID-19 and economic, political, and social systems. It's about international business and the role of corporations in society. So one may actually start now reflecting on the real contribution of corporations to the liberation effort. Most of you are familiar with the discussions about the Sustainable Development Goals. I have shied away from doing research on that for various reasons, but one goal, Goal 17, is about global partnerships. And the current situation may actually be taken as a litmus test for whether or not private business is able to contribute to kind of social and sustainable developments. And this may also be at the international business strategy level, something that people may want to start thinking about. That is actually what I wanted to share with you, some of my thoughts on COVID-19 and the international business strategy implications. I would like to thank you for your kind of attendance, and I'm now waiting for and looking forward to hopefully a bit of a discussion, questions, queries, comments.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Professor Stefan. That was very insightful. Thank you. We've got a couple of questions here that have been asked, so I'll just put them on to you. And I'd like to start with the first one from Reynaldo, who's asking, how can COVID-19 affect internationalization of higher education in the UK, Europe, and elsewhere? And what should higher education institutions do in order to deal with the COVID-19 impact?
That's a tough one. That's kind of, I think, for another hour of presentation and discussion. Higher education challenges. I mean, there's kind of business-related higher education challenges. There's intellectual higher education challenges. I think all systems are go with respect to addressing intellectually the COVID-19 crisis. When it's coming more to the business side, and by business side, I do not necessarily imply for profit. Obviously, we have serious challenges with the lack of mobility of people. That's affecting me as a kind of a lecturer, teacher, or tutor. That's affecting international students. On the one hand, there's flexibility required. Short term, medium term, longer term, it's difficult really to predict. So what we're doing at the moment is, and I think that's the right way to do, we're kind of trying to engage as much as possible. And there's a big opportunity for universities to reach out. And I think the webinar is one illustration of that, to kind of audiences in other places through the internet. Assuming that the internet will continue to be stable and to be free of censorship and other restrictions. So that may be one opportunity to actually reach out and to engage. Other opportunities will kind of emerge as soon as the borders are opening again. And there, I must say, from the international business strategy perspective, that is a serious challenge. But for example, Manchester with a global MBA program, I mean, this is not an advertising window now, but I've been teaching on the program for 7 years. It's a fabulous opportunity to learn about other places, and you can't really learn about international business if you haven't been to other places and discussing with other people. This is what at the moment we kind of need to scale back a bit. But as soon as kind of borders are opening up again, as the situation is kind of becoming better, we need to start going out again, but then also mindful of potential risks that are out there.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. We've just got another question here. What type of investments do you think are likely to bridge the global supply chain gaps between demand and supply?
If I had a clue about that, I think I'd be a rich man soon. I think all companies are going, I mean, from the perspective of the multinational corporations with kind of global supply chain, I usually call them ecosystem, but it's not usually one chain, it's kind of a whole system, an architecture, supply chain architecture, an ecosystem with different suppliers. They're kind of engaging in a kind of a risk analysis and reconfiguring the supply chains accordingly. And I can't really say where it's going. The supply chain experts are also kind of, well, obviously it's their kind of, my own initial area of research is more human resources, labor markets, migration, and comparative business, but the supply chain specialists are kind of oscillating in their kind of opinions between well, literally companies trying to shorten their supply chains in order to gain better control. But on the other hand, we will continue to have some supply chains where you have to reach out in order to get particular raw materials where you can't get, as a European multinational, specific metals in kind of Europe, where you have to reach out, and that will continue. So sorry, I can't really give any specific details of where investments will be made, unfortunately, or where they're useful.
That would have been too good. We've just got another one here. Will the digital transformation we are experiencing continue and consolidate, develop after all of this as well?
I think yes. I mean, but that's again, that's just kind of a bit more informed, maybe more than some others, because I'm paid for doing a lot of reading for engaging in those kind of discussions and following the literature and research. I think the digital transformation will get a massive boost. I think that's what you can witness in everybody's life. So I'm assuming that most of the participants here would have children or family, even if you don't have your own children yet, family, and you will have seen how the kids have responded to the crisis. Obviously, there's also individual characteristics, personality characteristics, psychological aspects of that, but I'm stunned by how quickly my kids literally learned about digitalization. And I think that will go across the board. That will affect work organization. That will affect all areas of human resource management, of learning, of training. That will affect interaction. It may be that we travel less in the future, but then kind of interact more through kind of digital means. That raises obviously also issues about privacy. There's a lot of risks there involved too, but I mean, we have to address them if we want to continue with globalization and to benefit from the advantages of international trade, international cooperation, international interaction. We have to find ways of regulating that and minimizing the adverse impacts, as on privacy, totalitarian states exploiting and that kind of means, not being held accountable. But yes, I think that will be a big, will it be a game changer? It will be like a catalyst. So it will speed up processes significantly, which I would not have expected a year or two ago in the way it happens.
Perfect. Thank you, Stefan. We'll just take one more here. Your assumption is that the world moves on as one from the lockdown. Aren't all the scenarios for liberation possible at the same time in different places and with risks arising from an unequal liberation experience and to a new normal?
That's actually where I'm not saying stuck, but this is what I need to think through. I think at the moment I would tend to say that unless there's anything centrally happening at the United Nations level where kind of literally the different governments involved get their act together in face of a significant crisis, as for example we've seen after the end of World War II, with the Nuremberg trials, with the Tokyo trials, with the whole situation where we had kind of the Great Partition, where we had the Chinese Civil War, the Great March, a situation where there was massive disruption on large scale in almost all places of the world, decolonization. The United Nations got together with the Declaration, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, establish a multilateral system, no matter how imperfect and incomplete it was. But that was a situation where literally governments with different interests got their act together pragmatically. And I think well, there is a chance that we may see that happening. However, if it's not happening, and it may be kind of a perspective of 4, 5, 6 years there, if it's not happening, we will see major disruptions in some parts of the world, which is extremely unpredictable. You can't say that this part, which today seems to be close to collapse, will be doing badly or well. We've seen, when you look at the statistics of the COVID-19 cases, when you look at the healthcare systems crisis in the United States, I mean, some of you may have followed the news about the situation unfolding in New York, something which you never thought would happen, in a sense. Or the situation, the death ratios in the United Kingdom, something which is at the moment looking much worse as compared to some countries where we would have expected significant difficulty. You can't really predict where it's happening. Everybody could be affected, and that's kind of a bit, well, unpleasant in terms of uncertainty, because you don't know where to put your bets in the end. But this is what we may see on the way to that. I'm not hoping it's happening, but there's a kind of a chance that it's happening.
Absolutely. That's perfect. Thank you very much, Stefan, for answering all these questions. I'm just keeping time in mind as well. I wouldn't want to keep everyone longer. So thank you first and foremost, Dr. Stefan, for your presentation. Very, very insightful. I really appreciate your time. And thank you to all who've attended the session. We really appreciate your time as well. We hope you've enjoyed the session. Please do keep in mind that we have another session here tomorrow on disruptive technologies and the sharing economy with Professor Paul Patton. So if you're interested in that webinar, please do visit our website and register for the event. And with that, thank you very much for attending this session. Please do stay safe and do take care of yourselves, and we'll see you next time for a future webinar. Thank you very much for attending the session, and do take care. Thank you.
Thank you, and bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.